Now that the dust on UFC 250 is now settled after the two main events, two fighters who are going to go on to do amazing things in probably two of the biggest super fights we've ever seen in the UFC, now have both lost. How does this affect the UFC? How does it affect the two fighters going forward? And after a year of people, fans especially, been looking at the UFC going, look, the product is slipping, the product's going backwards, it's not as exciting as back in the day. How does this affect that narrative for going forward in the next year or so? Because I think it massively affects it. And looking at that future view, how do the two fighters get back in? What do they do next? So, getting into the overall arcing view, Topuria lost in the main event of UFC 250 to Justin Gaethje, a big upset win for Justin Gaethje, which he did incredibly well. He followed a game plan incredibly well. The size of Gaethje, he was massive in there compared to Topuria, which definitely helped him, but just great ideas, great setups that just worked. You could clearly see had been worked through with his coach and pulled it together at the point he needed to, in front of the biggest crowd, in front of his, he's an American from the USA, a place where he would have dreamt to fight for all his life, and now has done so. Something that no other person can ever or will probably ever say in their lives is that they got to fight at the White House on the lawn, walked in from the Oval Office in front of the president. Incredible win from Justin Gaethje. Topuria, obviously big damage to him into the face where he didn't get up from the stool in round 5. His team ended the contest at that point to save the fighter. Look, he had two broken orbitals, I think, definitely broken nose, I'd say. There's something definitely in his nose, may not be fully broken, but 100% some major damage to the ribs as well after that incredible knee from Justin Gaethje in round 4. One of the best shots I've ever seen, to be quite honest. Incredible shot from Justin Gaethje, and something other people should start using because it was great. Onto the next fight, onto the co-main, Pereira versus Gane. Obviously, Pereira going up to heavyweight, and this whole fight looking at who is going to be next opponent for Tom Aspinall. Hopefully he gets back in the ring later on this year, so that'll be the contender of who Tom is going to be fighting next. And Pereira lost. Pereira lost in quite convincing fashion, to the point where clearly heavyweight isn't his weight to be at. He's probably gaining too much weight for his frame. His frame doesn't like that level of weight. Whereas Gane, he's made to be a heavyweight. His movement is so much greater than Pereira because his frame is keeping that weight in the right places to use it, rather than Pereira seemed to have went up and he's never fast, but the size definitely got to him. He was a lot smaller than Gane, and that power as well coming back at him, it doesn't suit him. He suits the light heavyweight is probably his great place to be at. And yeah, I think Gane is a tough fight for any heavyweight. He's very fast for a heavyweight, and it just didn't stylistically match up, and that's sort of why I thought Pereira would win. So I was definitely wrong, but I did think it would be a much closer fight than some people were predicting. Like, oh, Pereira's going to run through him. Look what Pereira's done the other when he went up to light heavyweight. Well, there is a limit to how much you can just keep jumping up, and it's same with Topuria. There's a limit to your body is suited for this weight class, and both fighters found it in this exact event that your body's suited to a certain weight class. You can only go up so far, and at the smaller weight classes, that jump for your body is quite a lot bigger. Pereira, obviously, from light heavy to heavy but it's a big weight. It's a big size difference even for him. And you think he came from middleweight, so that is an incredible jump, and a jump that we haven't ever or really seen, especially in modern era of UFC. Anyone complete that and really show how dominant they are at the heavyweight versus, say, middleweight. And this is the key thing. Look, the UFC were really hoping Topuria gets through this, and Pereira, because Pereira versus Tom is massive. Yes, I've got to admit, and this is something we'll talk about afterwards, is Tom now as big? I think it's close. It's getting up there. I'd say it's close. Topuria, though, he's going to have a major amount of time out of the ring. Yeah, I think in at least a year to get back off them injuries. They were incredible injuries that he stayed in there for so long. Broken ribs for sure. Definitely broken orbitals in both eyes. That is a tough one to come back from as quickly and to be dominant, because he's a striker. He's going to, how's he going to get back to his ways of, he can take a shot and he's not afraid of throwing? That'll be a real problem for Topuria. He has to get over before he gets back in the ring. So look, he's going to be off for a major amount of time, at least a year, I believe. If he comes back any earlier, I'd be concerned for how he's got back, because he needs to get back in the gym, needs to get his confidence back after that fight for sure. How do I think both these fights affect the UFC? I think, look, it is a hit when the UFC have to really push on these numbered cards, because there have been a lot of murmurings, and from me as well, 100% from me. I made a video on it as well. The UFC not having these stars, the stars aren't being made because no one's getting up to that level, and the people aren't speaking. Either there's people who can speak and do well on the mic and they're popular and they lose and they can't ever get up to that level, or they can get up to that level and there's no character behind them and no ability to sell a fight, as it were. Look, Pereira sells fights well, 100%. He's not great at speaking. English isn't his first language, so look, it becomes a very big problem where it's hard for him to communicate with the vast majority of fans around the world. But Pereira is that good in that he's done it in incredible fashion for so long. He has massive fans from his performances, and the fact that he keeps turning up. He keeps turning up every time he goes up. He's continuing to go up. He had that massive rivalry with Adesanya, which got a massive amount of fans. So look, Pereira's, I think, one of the outliers in that case, where look, the fact he can't talk on a mic as well as many others doesn't matter, because actually at the end of the day, his performances speak for themselves, and he's been in that many big rivalries that fans cared about. That sells anyway. His name now sells fights. Gane, I think the Tom Aspinall fight sells itself for what happened, but not because of he goes out there and really rocks a mic and he's looked absolutely dominant for his whole career. No, I think the fact that the eye poke happened and all this, and he has beaten Pereira, really jumps up his stock and sells fights to fans. I don't think it sells fights more than Tom Aspinall being in that fight anyway. I think Tom Aspinall being against either would sell. I think the Pereira fight sells way more, 100%. But the Gane fight, yes, Gane and the controversy behind it does sell fights, and probably near enough the number that they need, around about what they need to sell. Pereira, though, I've got to admit, I do believe there'll be a big influx of ticket sales because of Pereira versus Aspinall, because it would be a massive fight. Whereas Gane, it's really just based upon a one fight problem and one fight injury. So, look, I think they're okay in that sense. I don't think that fight really, I keep going back to it, they would sell more tickets, but overall, you're talking about that you're going to sell none. They're going to sell the fight. If it was Gane or Pereira, it's going to sell enough for them to be happy. I think the Topuria fight, look, that's a problem. Look, there was already a super fight with Makhachev. He's looking at it, talking about Ryan Garcia saying, I'm gonna beat you easy type thing. Look, there's many options for the UFC, and Zuffa with the boxing arm that Dana White also is in charge of to really get some big fights out there and make some big events with Topuria at the back of it. And that's just gone. He's going to be out for a good amount of time, a year. And after that fight being beaten by Gaethje, that drops him a good few levels on this. Look, Makhachev ain't looking at him. Makhachev, if you're reading it real and you're looking at no bias, Makhachev is so much bigger than Topuria, and that size made a massive difference in the Gaethje fight. You're losing against Gaethje, who's looking to retire. You know, the guy has been beaten many times by fighters way less than what we thought was Topuria's level. And it is, at featherweight, Topuria is incredible. I think his size just doesn't work at lightweight. And I know that it's just one step up in weight class, but it's massive for him. He's not a big featherweight. The fact is, Max Holloway's in there, who's massively bigger, and you could see Max versus Gaethje was, similar sizing type thing for frame, but yeah, just needs to go back to the drawing board. Needs to go back to featherweight. But like, if he does, is there big fights there? I don't think there is. I don't see the next star who's going to fight him, and it just means Topuria is getting clearly probably a massive amount of money from the UFC. This is now going to cause them a problem because they're not going to find the fighters to get him a big time fight. He fights Makhachev, look, 100% he gets beaten easily by Makhachev after that performance. I don't see anything else. Makhachev is just way too big for him. So look, that super fight's gone. All this boxing talk is completely gone. Getting beaten by Gaethje, who's using a jab, and a strong jab at that. But come on, that's incredibly difficult to sell a boxing fight with Ryan Garcia or any other boxer now with Topuria involved. I think Topuria's in a bad place. He's going to come back after a year or a bit. The fans are going to be, right, he's coming back, but, look, you've been out for a year. That's how you sort of left it with, clearly massive amount of injuries from getting beaten by Justin Gaethje, who, look, hasn't looked like he's setting the world on fire in recent fights either. So, look, I truly believe that the fight that will happen next is Paddy Pimblett for Topuria. I know it sort of looked like they're obviously they're great. They hate each other. They're going to sell a massive fight between the two of them. And look, everyone's going to watch it 100%. But what the problem is that we thought Paddy was a level below Topuria, and really Paddy's not getting up to championship level. He got beaten by Gaethje, and we really thought, okay, yeah, the Topuria fight isn't going to happen, even though they hate each other and there's great back and forth their ability and it would sell. It doesn't make sense now. 100% makes sense. Paddy Pimblett had a better performance against Gaethje than Topuria had. 100%. He got less hurt than Topuria. He lasted out to a decision. Okay, Topuria looked like he was going to finish Gaethje, which Paddy never looked like he was, but to be honest, it's sort of a one's better at this, one's better at that between the two of them against Gaethje. Both of them lost. One of them made it to the final bout, one didn't. And the fact that Topuria had such a problem with the size of Gaethje, the Paddy Pimblett fight makes so much sense now. And I think that's the fight you make. You let Paddy carry on, get a few more wins. Topuria comes back against Paddy Pimblett because there's no one at featherweight you can put Topuria out against. Yes, that might change within the year, but the fact is there's no one really that you go, I want to see him fight him. Paddy Pimblett is the fight to make, 100%. I think this has totally damaged the UFC. The results of the two co-main events. But I think, look, the Tom Aspinall, whoever's going to fight Tom Aspinall would sell fights. That's 100% anyway. Pereira's going to have to go back to light heavy and try and find his way, I'd say. That becomes a problem because there's not really anyone for him to fight there. So I think that's an issue where the UFC got a star who they can't really match up to Topuria, who they can't really match up other than one fight with Paddy Pimblett, and what happens there if Paddy wins, that becomes an issue as well. So look, the UFC are in a difficult position, but one key thing they've got is Conor McGregor coming back this year, in July for a fight which covers off a big, gets them a lot of pay-per-view numbers in. It will. Everyone will be watching that against Max Holloway because it is the return of him after 5 years. He's a star everywhere. He's not just a UFC star. He is a global star. He's a celebrity. Everyone will be watching that fight. And so that sort of gets the fans of the UFC's back. And, like me as a fan, gets the UFC a bit of grace of going, actually, you've had some quite high star power fights this year. You just need to continue and bobble along for the rest of the year. But look, I can foresee a massive problem next year where we start getting to the same situation again, where just the star power is non-existent on these cards for the UFC. They need to start developing these new names because, look, Gaethje's going away. Pereira's, not a spring chicken. Topuria's just been beaten, badly damaged. And you're relying so heavily on, if a fighter gets injured, a fighter gets, like the eye poke with Tom Aspinall, you're relying on some of these people so heavily in divisions that it becomes a real problem when something happens. And it does. In this type of sport, it always will do, where injuries happen. So the UFC have to start trying to bolster that, the stardom, not superstars, but people who can step in, and if they get a good win, they start developing into that stardom role and that star power, and the talk of boxing fights starts happening, because that's when the casual fans are interested. So let me know what you think in the comments down below. Like, subscribe, and I'll see you next time.